On a sunny morning at one of America's busiest and most prestigious airports, a day that began like any other would end in an unforgettable way. Today, the flight bound for Sweden was not just any flight. It was the center of everyone's attention. Along with numerous celebrities, business people, and prominent figures, ordinary passengers were also boarding the plane for a significant journey. The airport, always bustling with activity, now had the atmosphere of a festival. Inside the Grand Terminal, there was a sense of urgency. Some people were rushing to catch their flight, while others eagerly tried to catch a glimpse of the celebrities and take photos with them. The arrival of these famous personalities, accompanied by crowds of admirers, turned the terminal into what felt like a live performance. The airport management had grown accustomed to such spectacles, as they happened almost routinely. Every week, hosting so many big names on the same flight had become a norm for the security teams and staff. This wasn't just an extraordinary experience for the employees, even visitors found themselves in a surreal environment. Flashing cameras, dazzling luxury cars, and elegantly dressed celebrities transformed the airport into another world. Some passengers blended into the crowd as they headed to their gates, while others walked calmly toward the boarding area. Yet all eyes remained fixed on the stars boarding the plane. As each person stepped inside, their smiles warmed the atmosphere of the cabin. After clearing security, passengers boarded the aircraft and found their seats. Slowly, the cabin began to fill up. Despite occasional minor jolts, the plane maintained stability overall. The passengers were in high spirits, their faces radiating joy and calm. Those seated inside felt the thrill of embarking on a new adventure. The moment everyone anticipated came as the plane lifted off and began its climb skyward. The plane, though a bit aged, was deemed entirely safe by the flight crew and airport officials. It was expected to remain operational for several more years. This thought, however, didn't cross the minds of most passengers, who were solely focused on the journey ahead as they watched the plane take off. The airport personnel, who had worked with this aircraft for years, were confident in its safety. The plane soared into the sky, its enormous wings and powerful engines carrying it upward, as the crowd in the terminal waved it off with raised hands. Everyone had their own reasons for anticipating this flight with excitement, yet no one could foresee how dramatically this journey would end. As the plane began its airborne journey, the flight crew settled comfortably into their stations, attending to their duties. Meanwhile, the passengers had settled into their seats, enjoying the calm start of the trip. The atmosphere inside the cabin was undoubtedly serene and peaceful, but high above, an ominous storm was waiting, a disaster, an unnoticed threat. The morning of the plane's takeoff was just another ordinary day for Scout, who lived on the farm. A strong and intelligent horse, Scout had started the day happily, just like every other. As the morning sun spread its peaceful light across everything on the farm, Scout's heart was filled with love and happiness. Slowly, Scout opened his eyes, stretched, and yawned atop the warm hay, bathed in the first rays of the morning light. A small smile crossed his face, as if he sensed something was different today, but he couldn't exactly understand what it was. Scout immediately went over to his owner. Seeing his owner's smiling face was always a reward for him. As his owner fed him patiently, Scout embraced the happy moment with love. But suddenly, as he ate, an unsettling sensation crept over him. This wasn't something he normally felt. In that instant, the peace he had felt vanished, replaced by a strange discomfort. It was as if something was about to happen. But what? This was not something Scout typically experienced. Yet, instead of resisting this feeling, he accepted it and continued eating. The farm was truly vast. The forests around it were some of Scout's favorite places. The farm only had people and a few animals, meaning there were almost no strangers around. Although wild animals sometimes roamed the depths of the forest, Scout and the other farm animals enjoyed each other's company. Most of his days were spent running, playing, and spending time with the other animals. Sometimes, playing with the lambs or other horses, he wasn't just having fun as an animal, but as the loyal companion of his closest friends. Everything was joyful. His life was becoming more colorful with each passing day. Scout had been living on the farm for 3 years. He greatly enjoyed living with his mother, who had always cared for him, raised him, and taught him. Scout loved his mother dearly. Being near her made him feel safe. However, he also enjoyed occasionally misbehaving to irritate her. All the animals on the farm knew about Scout's cheerful and mischievous nature. His mother was the most affected by his antics. Sometimes, Scout would push her patience by playing little pranks and managing to annoy her. Although his mother would laugh at these antics, sometimes his jokes could be quite irritating. But in the end, his mother's love always gave Scout a sense of security. Today, however, his mother had to go to another farm. But the separation would be short for Scout because his mother would return the next day. This news stirred up a wave of excitement inside Scout. When his mother was away, he would have more freedom to move around the farm. He would have the chance to misbehave a little more. For a while, he could run freely over the grass without his mother's restrictions. With his mother's departure, Scout became more energetic. As he ran with the other farm animals, he was also having a great time. But after a while, he began to tire. His body, after hours of running, told him it deserved a break. He headed towards the hayloft at the corner of the farm. There, nestled in the hay, he decided to rest for a moment. At that instant, all the fatigue and unease vanished. The discomfort within Scout gave way to deep relaxation. His eyes slowly closed, and he drifted into a dreamlike sleep. However, during that sleep, another reality awaited him very soon. Scout's peaceful life would unexpectedly change that day. The calm atmosphere on the farm continued unnoticed, unaware of the impending disaster. The calm morning on the farm was suddenly interrupted by the ringing of a phone. Shortly after, a frightening news call to one of the farm's owners turned everything upside down. The voice on the other end of the phone was speaking frantically and loudly. "The farm is burning! Get here immediately!" This news disrupted the entire order on the farm. One of the farm's main leaders, stunned and shocked, quickly ended the call. His eyes were wide with disbelief. He had to make a decision right away, and without hesitation, he rushed outside. The leader, his voice loud and urgent, called to the others. "There's been an accident at the other farm. The farm is on fire. Quick, everyone, get moving." His words instantly mobilized everyone at the farm. The whole place erupted into chaos. Animals, people, everything turned into a flurry of activity. Under the leader's command, all the workers quickly organized and began moving. The first task was for a group of 10 people to take the animals to their shelters. They did everything they could to ensure the animals' safety. As each person hurried, they also worked to calm the animals' fear. Running behind each other, they gradually moved all the animals to safe areas on the farm. No one was willing to risk the possibility of danger, but there was a problem. There was one animal that needed to remain in the safe area outside. The brave horse Scout. Scout had been sleeping in the hayloft that morning. Peacefully, he had closed his eyes and was trying to rest from his fatigue. The commotion at the farm, unfortunately, hadn't yet disturbed his sleep. Everyone was rushing around, giving each other urgent instructions, but at that moment, Scout was completely unaware. He had fallen into such a deep sleep that it was almost impossible for him to sense anything happening around him. The workers too, as they rushed to check on the animals, didn't notice that Scout was still asleep. With everything else being so urgent, no one realized his situation. Their attention was entirely focused on the fact that they had to leave quickly. The scale of the accident at the other farm was so large that it took up all of their attention and time. The fire at the other farm was enormous and spreading rapidly. The entire team, doing their best, headed toward the other farm. "Is everything safe at the farm?" they asked each other. For a moment, everyone grew silent. All the people and animals on the farm were in safe areas, but one person was missing. While Scout slept deeply in the hayloft, smoke from the fire continued to rise into the air. The fire posed such a massive threat that everyone had to race against time. The leader quickly directed his team. "Move quickly. Anyone who can help at the other farm needs to go there. The animals are safe, but the fire is too big, and we don't have time to waste." But there was a problem. Scout. While the entire team was heading toward the fire, one animal remained behind. Scout, still asleep and enjoying the tranquility of the forested area, was unaware that the danger was quickly approaching. The looming effects of the fire would soon reach him, and the threat he didn't realize was coming would soon find him. As the plane moved slowly through the sky, the passengers inside began to feel a sense of normalcy. Everyone was enjoying their journey, chatting, smiling, and savoring the travel experience. The plane was progressing as planned, and the crew in the control room confirmed that everything was running smoothly. The pilot expected the flight to be calm, and the passengers were happily resting. However, as a twist of fate would have it, the peaceful atmosphere was about to be disrupted. Suddenly, a deep jolt was felt within the plane. The passengers looked at each other, confused, trying to understand what was happening. The plane began to shake violently. A wave of fear surged through everyone. The aircraft, rapidly trembling, started to disrupt the flight's stability. The pilot tried to understand what was happening for a moment, but unfortunately, the worst-case scenario he feared had come true. The plane's engine had malfunctioned. The pilot's face froze, and despite his efforts to hide his anxiety, he had to accept the grim reality. Immediately, the flight crew sprang into action. The attendants quickly took the necessary precautions to check the engine. Inside the cabin, everything changed in an instant. The passengers, who had been enjoying their journey, lost their smiles, replaced by anxious looks. The once calm atmosphere shifted to one of panic. People exchanged fearful glances, some of them nervously praying. When the crew inspected the engine, they realized the situation was truly dire. Suddenly, dense smoke began to spread inside the cabin. The smoke made it difficult for the passengers to breathe, and panic intensified. Everyone felt as though they were suffocating from the smoke. The flight attendants, with the last of their strength, tried to calm the passengers, but their efforts were in vain. The fear on everyone's faces became more apparent with every passing second. Once the pilot confirmed the engine failure, he quickly attempted to communicate with the control tower for guidance. He made contact with the tower, and an emergency plan was initiated. The tower tried to direct the plane toward the nearest airport. However, this decision did little to ease the passengers' fear. Without fully understanding what was happening, the passengers asked each other questions, their eyes filled with terror. The plane continued to shake violently. The pilot steered the plane toward the route suggested by the tower, but suddenly, the plane experienced another intense jolt. This tremor was so strong that it jolted everyone in their seats. The plane veered off course as the pilot and passengers were gripped by panic. The plane started to drift in an uncertain direction. The passengers' screams echoed in the air, but these cries brought no real solution. The plane was tossed around like a boat in a storm, and the passengers' screams only intensified the atmosphere of fear inside. Despite this, the pilot maintained his professionalism and tried to remain calm, making one last effort. At that moment, everything seemed to spiral out of control. The passengers were in a state of shock. Unfortunately, stopping the descent was impossible. The plane was rapidly descending, and no one knew how close they were to the ground. However, one thing was certain. Everyone knew that this moment was incredibly critical. As the plane continued its rapid descent, it was heading straight for the forest near Scout's farm. The noise from the plane's engines was so loud it was almost deafening. This was the moment that woke Scout from his sleep. At first, he didn't understand what was happening. He opened his eyes, scanned his surroundings in confusion, but the deafening sound of the plane's engines immediately alarmed him. Fear began to consume him quickly, and as he tried to make sense of the situation, his heart raced uncontrollably. Scout remained still for a moment, paralyzed by the fear overwhelming him. His eyes started to spot the thick smoke rising from the forest. There was something changing in the air. The animals on the farm were also in a state of alarm, running frantically to their shelters and searching for each other in panic. Nothing seemed normal. No one could say that everything was under control. The fact that everyone else had left the farm made it even more difficult for Scout to do something on his own. Suddenly, a loud crashing sound from the plane reached his ears. In that instant, he realized that everything was changing rapidly. The plane was descending into the depths of the forest. Scout, in sheer terror, gathered the courage to move his limbs. Though he couldn't fully grasp what was happening, it was clear that something was very wrong. The plane's descent ended in a huge explosion when it collided with the ground. Trees near the farm fell with a cry, and the smoke quickly covered everything, turning the area into a thick fog. Scout struggled to make sense of all that was happening, but he knew he had to act. He wasn't sure what to do, but he felt an urgency to do something. Without wasting a moment, he jumped up and began running. His mind was racing, unsure of how to escape the farm or where to go for help. But he knew he couldn't stand still. He had to move. If he didn't, it might be too late. The tall fences surrounding the farm blocked his path. Scout tried to leap over the fences, but each attempt was unsuccessful. The barbed wire on top of the fences was so close that it nearly brushed against his coat. Yet Scout was determined not to give up. He kept trying, faster each time, and eventually succeeded in leaping over the fence. He left the farm and sprinted toward the area where the smoke was rising. As he ran, his mind was racing. "What can I do?" he thought. How could he save the people? There was no one left on the farm. How could he bring help? In a split second, the only thing that came to mind was to guide people back to the farm. But this seemed nearly impossible. How could a horse rescue people stranded in a plane crash? With every step, Scout felt the weight of time. The only thing he could do was to reach the crash site as quickly as possible. But he was alone, and the journey would be long. Filled with fear and helplessness, he decided to do everything he could. His goal was clear. He had to reach the spot where the smoke was rising, where the plane had crashed. However, he had no idea how difficult and exhausting that journey would be. When Scout finally reached the crash site, the area was shrouded in thick, disorienting smoke. The visibility was almost zero, and trying to escape from the smoke would have been deadly. But Scout didn't hesitate for a second. He knew how precious time was. Every second was another risk to the lives of the people. The brave horse took a deep breath and charged into the smoke. He moved swiftly, trying to assess the situation. He saw people lying unconscious on the ground. Many were still twitching, but it was hard to tell if they were alive. By a stroke of luck, the plane had crashed into the trees, making a somewhat safe landing. The trees had provided protection, preventing the people from scattering, keeping them grouped together. This was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dire situation. Scout immediately sprang into action, first heading toward a young woman. She was unconscious but still showing signs of life. With determination, Scout grabbed her arm with his mouth and began pulling her up. It was a difficult task. The woman's body seemed glued to the ground, but Scout's persistence gave him the strength to overcome every obstacle. At first, it seemed more logical to drag the woman back to the farm, but time was too short. Scout didn't want to waste a single second. So, he decided to move her only to a safe area. Covered in sweat, his body growing more exhausted by the minute, but it wasn't enough to stop him. Relentlessly, with great determination, Scout dragged the young woman a few steps further and gently laid her down. Then, he immediately set a new goal. He had to gather the injured people around him. One by one, Scout started pulling the victims. Using every ounce of strength he had left, he moved each person a little further away from the crash site. After a while, he was drenched in sweat and extremely tired, but nothing could stop him. His sole focus was saving lives, and his resolve helped him push through his exhaustion with every step. Then, Scout came to an elderly man. The old man was severely injured and could barely move. Scout tried with all his might to pull him along, but this time, it was even harder. The man's body was heavy, and Scout had to use his mouth to drag him a little bit at a time. But suddenly, he felt a sharp pain. The strain on his jaw was so great that a few of his teeth broke. The pain was intense, but stopping wasn't an option. Despite the excruciating pain, Scout's eyes showed something more: determination. With a stronger grip, Scout continued pulling the elderly man, using his teeth to hold on even tighter. Every second he grew more tired, but every person was waiting to be saved. His eyes were watering from the smoke, but that didn't slow him down. It only made him more cautious. Slowly, persistently, Scout found the remaining people, and by listening to their voices, he realized they were still alive. After a little more time spent navigating through the smoke, he finally reached the last few people. Finding them had been incredibly difficult, but in the end, Scout managed to get them all to safety. He was exhausted and could barely keep his eyes open, but he knew he had done everything he could. In that moment, he felt a deep sense of peace, because as a horse, he had given his absolute best in saving every life he could. Scout had saved the people with great determination, but the scene he faced deeply affected him. Many of the survivors were severely injured, and some were on the brink of death. Their eyes were cloudy, filled with panic. They didn't understand what had happened. They were simply staring at Scout in terror, feeling helpless. Scout wanted to do something, anything, but he wasn't sure what exactly he could do. His entire body was shaking from exhaustion, but he realized that the only way to help them was to get assistance. The first thing he needed to do was bring someone here. He couldn't heal the injured alone, but if he could get help, he could save them all. He quickly ran toward the farm, but it didn't take long for him to realize there was no one there. The farm was completely empty. Everyone had gone to the other farm. For a moment, Scout paused, unsure of what to do. But then, a thought crossed his mind. The other farm was far away, but if he could reach it, he might find help. He knew that was his only option. The problem was, he didn't know the way to the other farm. Just as despair began to creep in, a glimmer of hope appeared. Some of the farm workers emerged from the edge of the forest. With his eyes shining, Scout ran toward them. The workers, confused and unsure of what was happening, watched Scout approach. But one of them quickly looked around and noticed the smoke. At first, they thought there was a fire in the forest, so they grabbed their water buckets and began running. Scout's heart began to race. This was the help he had been waiting for. The water they carried was vital to saving the injured. The workers quickly made their way toward the source of the smoke. Scout ran ahead of them, leading them toward the crash site. When they arrived and stood amidst the wreckage, they initially only saw the plane's debris, but Scout had to guide them to the injured. With all his strength, he called out, drawing their attention to the people in need. For a moment, they stood in shock, unsure of what to do. But then they immediately grabbed their water buckets and rushed to assist the wounded. A sense of relief washed over Scout. Help had arrived, and that was a crucial step in saving lives. The workers quickly moved from one injured person to the next, pouring water on them and attempting to calm them, some even managing to revive them. Suddenly, everything seemed more hopeful. The burden was lifted from everyone's shoulders, but Scout knew they couldn't stop there. With the help of the workers, he used every moment to reach more injured people. For the first time in his life, Scout felt an overwhelming sense of happiness. Although he was exhausted and in pain, The peace of knowing he had saved lives was more important than anything else. Slowly but surely, all the injured people were transported to the hospital. The doctors immediately intervened, stabilizing everyone's condition. The survivors began to recover from the shock they had endured. After everything, Scout closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. In that instant, his entire world was filled with peace. He had succeeded. He had saved their lives. He had fought for them and won. A few days later, Scout's brave and heroic actions had made waves around the world. After the incident, news channels began broadcasting Scout's story to viewers across the globe. Everyone admired the strength and intelligence of the horse and the courage he had shown. Comments, tears, and emotional posts flooded social media, rapidly spreading the story of his heroism. People were talking about Scout's bravery and the lives he saved. According to the survivors and farm workers, Scout was the only hero who saved each one of them after the plane crash. However, the aftermath of the investigation revealed the tragic loss of 13 lives. Although this was a harsh reality that showed the scale of the disaster, it was clear that, without Scout's help, the number of survivors would have been much lower. His courage and determination deeply moved the entire world. A few days later, a group of well-dressed men and cameramen set off for the farm. The farm owners had already realized the significance of the visit. The men arrived formally as the world was discussing the incident, and they were there to honor Scout's heroism. After speaking with the farm owners, they all made their way to Scout. A large crowd had gathered, cameras were rolling, and everyone was eagerly watching the events unfold. After all the challenges Scout had endured, he was about to experience the moment he truly deserved. Several men approached him with pride and admiration. A grand ceremony began, broadcast live. It had become a tradition to honor the heroism of animals, and this was Scout's time to shine. As they neared him, a gold medal was placed around Scout's neck. Tears filled the eyes of everyone watching. Scout had been declared a hero. Although his eyes and coat still showed signs of exhaustion, there was a sense of peace on his face. His loyalty to the world and the people he saved had earned him this great honor. At that moment, everyone realized that not only Scout, but all animals could be heroes. The courage of a horse had shown the world how boundaries could be pushed to save human lives. Scout had become a hero, not just on the farm, but around the world.